Hi. It's early spring. It's March 26th, and I had a lot of conflict trying to start this video. I still have a lot of conflict trying to start this video because I think I'm tired and I start feeling empty about, with, just teaching the plants. I'm putting on a nice face, putting on a pretty face and a glowing face to reflect the light back into the world. But I don't feel that way. I don't always feel that way with the plants, with this deep bond, this deep cherishing of nature and the plants. That's been my way of living since I was, like a wee kiddo. Because yeah, I get tired of being such a wounded kiddo, of, like, I'm sure some other folks can relate to, you birth into this world and it's marvelous. The glory, the marvel is everywhere, and you see it, and oh my God, and in every precious flower is like a miracle and a world and holy and precious, and the magic and the light in everything is obvious. It's so obvious it could explode the whole of everything, right? As a child, right? And then we grow up, then I grew up, and every time I pointed to, hey, this is precious, this one is precious, this is precious, this is precious, don't kill this, please don't kill this, please don't kill that, please don't destroy that. And then to have it just destroyed right in front of me, over and 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 over. To plant a garden, to love a place, to tend the plants, to listen to them, to make a home there, then to see it clear cut, then to see it leveled, then to see it bulldozed, then to see it sprayed, then to see it gone, then to see it even just unloved. And it's hard. Part of me could make these videos like, oh, it's early spring in the mid-Atlantic. We're transitioning into the second phase of early spring. Pay attention now to this plant and this phase of nature. And, I don't have the breath left for that kind of innocence or something. Like it's kind of like a National Geographic, Nature Channel type of deal. It's like, oh, isn't nature so darling? Let's look. Let's take a look. Just to say that it is, and there is a violence right under the surface of all of this. Like there is a violence so great. It is literally threatening to, slit the neck of the entire world. And how can I be a human being and still be warm-blooded and sit here and not admit to myself that every action that this culture in this country has taken in front of my eyes over my life has been, it has demonstrated in its actions. And actions are where you look for love or the absence of love, not in words, but in actions. In its actions, this country has demonstrated profound hatred for nature. And I think it's hatred. Fear in certain parts, maybe some weird guilt and other stuff. But I really feel, at least right now, Rosie, the goat, is just staring at me, giving me faces. I think she's channeling through me right now. I can't stop laughing the way she's staring at me. Where was I? Yeah, anyway. So, I think it's not only obvious to me, but it's obvious to others and many all over the world that, like, whatever this quality of hatred and this unceasing flow of violence towards the living world, enacted largely by dominant, so-called civilized, so-called industrialized, advanced cultures of the world now, so-called. That violence is the same. I think it is of the same quality, and it may very well be of the same thread, the very same rope, as the hatred and violence against women all over the world. I think they're one and the same. And that affects the way I speak, that affects the way I talk, it affects the way I share, the way I want to share, if I even want to share or not. Got terrible composition here. I don't know what to do here. I wish you could see the plants better. We'll get to that. Yeah, because it's like I can't just say, oh, here's like the beautiful yellow dock and bitter dock leaves, and here's how you do with it, and isn't this fun? Let's cook with it and eat with it and learn the botany, and oh, aren't we clever? When it's like, like these are some of the, the victims of the whole world. These are some of the scapegoats, the vilified, hated and damned, right? Are the plants, the animals, the bugs. I mean, just everything that lives and dares to thrive. So she's still staring at me. She's giving me like a weird goat face look. Yeah, so it's like, if you get on a path with plants, if you, get into studying herbalism, it becomes obvious, that like learning and loving the plants in this direct way, living and loving, being in love with the animals and the plants and immersed and knowing your identity as a part of them, as coming from all of this, is a subversive thing. And it has been a highly persecuted thing for a long time, For those with European ancestry, as I am, as children, we're taught the stories of witches and witch trials as if they were fairy tales. Like, oh, the burning of the witches, and it's kind of dramatized. And, God, I can feel how much I still almost don't have the full capacity to taste that and feel the brunt. That, like, if I have European heritage, I have ancestors who were murdered. Like, there were women ancestors of mine who were murdered in front of their communities by the people in power at the time, the so-called leaders of those communities. Okay, if you have European ancestry, you had women in your family who were murdered. Murdered in front of you, murdered in front of your other family members. This wasn't just like 1 or 2 or 3 people. I mean, hordes of the population of women who sang the song of the plants, who loved the plants, you know, who felt the song of nature in their bones and sang it and lived it, as humans have for all of time. Okay. I mean, that's a trauma that I haven't washed out of my bones. It's a trauma that I don't even know that we can fully process that as a culture. You know, and that's just one, right? I mean, the genocide all over the place, all over the world, and in every circumstance almost. I mean, it is, I mean, no wonder we're so dysfunctional as a people and as a culture now. The immensity of the underbelly of trauma right under our skin, right? So I remember that, you know, in a way. It's like, oh gosh, the violets are blooming. How precious right now that the violets are starting to bloom, you know. And in another way, it's like, walking this way, these little green beings are holy and always have been. And this culture I live in now, this country, does not support those kind of relationships and will not. Even if it pretends, like, oh, it'll transform it into something else, like market into, oh, it's green culture, and it's actually just new products to try to get you to buy, to continue the machine, the great machine of an economy based on ever-increasing returns, which is a myth. It's a myth that that's possible. So it's a self-devouring, you know, machine that eats people, that eats, you know, all forms of life. So, you know, it's important to remember that. I think it's sobering to remember that like, if you point yourself towards these kinds of relationships and live that kind of life, expect to not be supported by this culture and this country for it. Expect to not be supported by a globalized world. You know, by individuals you might be, but, you know, in magical ways you might be, but, you know, why should we believe for a moment, given the history of everything we do know, not even including all of the horrors that have happened that aren't written in the history books, that living as one, living within the great family and body of nature it's anti-nationalist, it's anti-religious, so it's what's the word? It's heretical, you know, to every religion. It is, you know, it defies social structures of control of all types, you know. those structures that would create social inequalities and imbalances of power. Like, this subverts all of those. So yeah, a globalized capitalist world culture is not going to support this. And yet we do it anyway, right? And yet somehow for some great mystery reason, have this unending will to speak about it, or at least to point, to like point at this, probably until the day I die, knowing that the capacity for impact will be so minuscule, and that anything I do is not going to change this culture as a whole. It's not going to change the trajectory of the violence. And that is a profound thing to live with, the limits of just digesting, knowing the limits of, what will be the fruits of my own life. Rosie got her horns stuck real bad. Hold on, I gotta untangle her. I'll be back. She didn't need me at all. She's fine. Smart cookie. Goats are smart cookies. Anyway, just to wrap that up a little bit, it's just that I say, if you're studying plants, if you're studying herbalism, if you're studying nature and nature skills and simple living and all that, if you're asking me, God, both goats are just staring at me at the same time. Two goats, both chewing cud in rhythm. Like matching, just staring at me. They just love to stare. Fucking love goats. Love these fucking goats. I would say that, like, if anyone or anything gives you a reason to hate a plant or any other part of nature, and tries to come up with some rationale for it, like, if anyone or anything gives you that message, to be highly suspicious, right? To be highly suspicious of that. And there is a story for every one of these plants around me right now. All these beautiful, beautiful plants. For every one of these, there is a story that this culture has. That this culture is spinning these stories, spinning these little, these little myths about why it's insignificant, or why it's dangerous, or why it should not exist, why it should not be here, why it does not belong, why it's hazardous to humans, or hazardous to livestock, or I could go on and on and on and on. But there is a story for every single one of these plants somewhere about basically why it's a piece of shit, and I find, based on the evidence of history and the actions of the present, to be highly suspicious of that. And in my own walk, I have simply, unfortunately, tragically, but realistically, I have unfortunately, nearly from the beginning, had to simply adopt the posture of understanding, believing that everything I'm being told is wrong from the start. And then I'll start there. That everything I've been taught and am being taught is a lie. And so starting there, And unfortunately, that has been the way that I have operated, that I've had to operate my entire life in order to get anywhere that meant anything to me. And to have any success in anything I tried to do, you know? It's my best advice. It's my best advice for the next generation of the world. Expect that you're being shat on. Expect that shit is just being flung at you, and you've got to have a shit shield. You know, hold up your little shit shield, or just throw it back or something. All right, I'm going to talk about the plants, in fact, because there is a lot going on, and it's very exciting. All right, so let me do a little rundown. I'm gonna talk through it real quick and try not to get bogged down in it. So as I mentioned, in fact, today is March 26th. So late March. It's here in the mid-Atlantic. It is early spring, but we're kind of entering into what I call like the second phase of early spring. Sorry I didn't do a video about phase 1. There's a lot going on. So phase 1 is kind of like when, you know, the green things are just waking up, and in the common human areas, the main plant foods that are everywhere, you know, are mainly going to be chickweed and what's called hairy bittercress, or any of the small weedy cardamine. Cardamine is a genus, cardamine mustards. And chances are you have certainly seen it in every yard ever. There's just not a patch of it right here for me to hold up, but I'll show it. Little plant with little teeny white flowers that just cover everyone's yard in the early spring. So that mustard, those little early mustards called the bittercresses, and chickweed and wild garlic greens. Like right now, the wild garlic greens are just so lush, and they're popping up everywhere. So in most lawns, most fields, most meadows, you know, the chickweed, the hairy bittercress, and the wild garlic are like the main plants. And here in the mid-Atlantic, another one I add to that, garlic pennycress, Thlaspi alliaceum. Weird fucking name. Weird genus name, Thlaspi. But garlic pennycress is also one of the main staple, common, cold weather edible greens in the mid-Atlantic. You won't see it down in the southeast. Like once you get down into North Carolina, Georgia, I never see it. But in Maryland, super abundant, and it's here in Virginia as well. So definitely a mid-Atlantic thing. Fabulous. So like grazing heavily on that, you know, like every meal, I'm just like, it's just like a pile of greens, you know, with maybe an egg on top or something. Early spring is the time of year of greens. You know, like most meals are just predominantly greens, raw greens and cooked greens and blended pesto greens, and you know, it's just like So that's what this time of year is for me. It's just like, and it's the time of year when there starts to be so much green growth that all of a sudden, I mean, it's like more than anyone could ever eat or ever preserve, and that the animals could ever eat. It's just like becomes a super abundance all of a sudden, you know, after a long winter of like carefully, you know, sort of like rationing the kale and the collards in the garden and some of the wild mustards, and using my dried greens, you know, where, you know, greens are so precious throughout all of winter. All of a sudden now it's just like, like boggles the mind by how much greenery there is, by how, you know, how much leafy green food. So that's early spring, you know, and somewhere in there dandelion greens will start coming up tender again. So watch out for those. Now we're kind of entering phase 2, where most of the chickweed is flowering, looking like this, but still tender. None of it has gotten too seedy or tough yet, and a lot of it is still not flowering and great for picking. You know, like a lot of it still looks like this. A lot of it is flowering. Even the flowering stuff isn't too tough yet. So still eating lots of chickweed, but all of a sudden now, the next wave is that like yellow dock and bitter docks leaves are big, like they are lush. Like look at them, like They're just full size all over the place. Whereas before, like, they're small. Like, they hang out small in the early spring and the winter. And all of a sudden, they're up. So that's a good indicator. Violets have started to bloom. So the wild violets and the common violets, like the common blue violet. Everything's out of reach right now. I'll show it. So when violets have just started to bloom, which is like, that's really ushering us into this next phase here. Most of the mustards now, like the hairy bittercress, is all flowering. A lot of it's starting to get tough and seedy. Some of it's still tender for eating. And the garlic pennycress is all rising into its flowering stalks. Not flowering yet, but the stalks are rising, like little broccolinis. So that's a great vegetable. So that's a good moment in spring. Oh my gosh, the mustards are starting to rise. And as well, the wintercress mustard, also called creasy greens, is also starting to rise. Okay, so mustards. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of wind. Mustards live in a basal rosette form for pretty much the whole cold season. When the temperature starts to warm up, they start to rise. And mustards are fast growing overall. Mustards in general are some of the first plants to flower and go to seed and die back in the spring. So right now, the mustards are rising, meaning they're growing their flowering stalks, little buds on top, which is just what broccoli rab and actual broccoli is and all that. So Barbaria vulgaris, the wintercress, is doing that now, rising. So you can snap off those little broccolini heads. That's a fantastic vegetable. The garlic pennycress is doing that now. And I imagine garlic mustard must be doing that now, but there isn't any on this particular landscape. So I don't have my eyes on it, but likely it should be. So all those mustards. As well, any garden mustards or sort of feral cultivated mustards should be doing the same thing right now. Also, like starting to grow those little broccolini stalks, as well as wild radish, Raphanistrum. So depending on different fields, have kind of a different arrangement of plants. But those are the big ones. Okay. So mustards are rising. Violets are just starting to bloom. Ground ivy, creeping Charlie, is just starting to bloom. Purple dead nettle has been blooming for weeks. The birds have started migrating, and that's becomes like really noticeable. Like a flock of Canadian geese just flew over like 2 days ago. The Carolina wrens have been building their nests for at least 2 weeks now. They're busy around, checking out different spots, building lots of nests, and the bird songs are changing. Winter birds are still here. But things are starting to change, right? So the bird migration is happening. What else with phase 2? And now, so with phase 2, kind of like early mid-spring. We're not quite in mid-spring, but we're like early mid. Is like we're on the cusp. We're poised to be watching and waiting and expecting for shoots, for perennial spring shoots. So that means I'm going around and I'm checking the pokeweed like every few days. Like, is the pokeweed starting to show any popping up of shoots at the base of the old dead stalks? Which it is. I saw nubs like that big popping through yesterday. I'm like, oh my God, it's happening. Right? So now's the time to be really peeking around at pokeweed, at asparagus, at Japanese knotweed. Just be like, look through the leaves and be like, you seeing any little nubs coming up from these big perennial plants yet? Because that's really the next big wave. As well as looking out for when the dandelions really start their full boom blooming. So that's going to be we're right on the cusp of the big dandelion bloom and of the perennial spring shoots. Right there, right on the cusp. Another one will be bamboo. So like keep your eyes on your bamboo patches, right? So we're still enjoying a lot of the tender early spring greens, like chickweed, like the wild mustards, like the wild garlic, either the greens or the bulbs. They're both tender and great right now. Since violet leaves are mostly all up, now is the time you start eating violet leaves. So still, shoveling that in every day. And stinging nettle. Stinging nettle is up right now as well. The Urtica dioica stinging nettle. So harvesting the little tips of stinging nettle, cooking those, making pesto of those. So like lots of greens. Okay. So eating heavily on all those. You could be preserving any of those if you wanted to. I usually don't for those. And then poised right on the cusp for paying attention to the perennial spring shoots and the dandelion blooms. And you could be eating yellow docks and bitter docks, the Rumex. Like these, like Rumex obtusifolius and Rumex crispus, and I kind of feel like they crossbreed as well, and there's some that have qualities of both. Like I had dock for leaves for breakfast today, cooked. Okay, so that's it for my little spiel. I do want to kind of zoom in and just give a little visual of some of these plants, and I'm going to be brief, but all the names of these plants will be down in the description below, and this is just a little helpful just to help you orient. This is not a super thorough class or botany lesson or anything, but just a little indicator, like if you're not already, pay attention to these plants. Go take a look at these plants. All right. Look at this. Look, it's a dream. It's just because the sun is so bright, it doesn't look as lush. God, it's just a dream. This is a dream. This is a springtime dream. Look how thick and lush the white clover is already. So thick. Oh my God. All this flowering chickweed. So much chickweed. This is all two flowering. Like I wouldn't pick from this chickweed patch, because I have choice. But oh my God. Look at the garlic pennycress. Look, this is what I'm talking about. Look how tall it's getting. So there's the leaf of the garlic pennycress. Very interesting shaped leaf. I do talk about this plant a lot on plant walks, and I'm sure I've talked about it in videos before. So if you've learned with me before, likely you've heard me blab about how wonderful this plant is. Amazing wild mustard. You can see that its stalks are rising right now. A lot of them haven't opened, so all this is tender. That'll snap easily. Put that on your salads. Eat that shit up. Throw it in a stir fry if you want to. Throw that shit in a pesto. It is delicious. Kind of zingy, but really sweet. I truly cherish this plant. I think this plant should be a staple spring food for everyone in the mid-Atlantic. Truly cherish that plant. You can see that very quickly some of them are starting to bloom. Look at that. Ah! It happened so fast. Like this literally happened like in a week and a half. These went from basal rosettes to rising to flowering. And sometimes in certain areas they can get about this tall if they're really happy. These are a little bit short. The garlic pennycress. So yeah, literally all this stuff. Just like you can just nip all those tops right now. So good. Hairy bittercress, of course, one of the precious fairy plants. Common nearly everybody's yard everywhere. There it is flowering. Here's the beautiful crest-shaped leaves. Very common, very recognizable plant. And yeah, it's all flowering now everywhere. I mean, it's just literally all over the entire property. And even though these are starting to form seed pods, see right there? It's called a silique, or if they're multiple, siliqua. It's kind of like a little bean, kind of. If they start to form a lot of seed pods, you'll notice they get tougher to chew. But right now, this is all tender. So literally, I just kind of like, prune all the top stuff, like leaves, flowers. If they're getting kind of seedy, I just nip the tops of the flowers.
Just throw all that shit on salads. Throw it on all food. Garnish all your food. Throw it in pestos. You can cook it if you want. I mean, my God, you can just harvest handfuls of this, but don't pull it up. I don't pull it up. If you want it to come back, don't pull it up. Just kind of, you just kind of grab some and prune it. And then if you let it go to seed, it'll drop seed and it'll be in your life forever afterwards. I mean, they're literally everywhere. Absolutely precious. The garlic pennycress, cardamine, hirsuta, and other species of cardamine. All these feral garden mustards, all doing the same thing. Here's this big patch of sort of feral mustards in here. They're all doing the same thing as well, where they're growing a stalk. See, they're starting to rise from the basal rosette, growing this nice stalk. And then I've just been snapping those, and then I cook them as a vegetable. And then the plants will shoot out more. You can see on this big one, I snapped it, ate it, and it's going to keep shooting out more. And then eventually I stop and I let it flower and make seed. Beautiful! Big old patch of creasy greens, wintercress, very dark green. There's another nice little patch. Chew one leaf to look at. There we go. There's a nice typical leaf of Barbaria vulgaris. Has that sort of cress shaped leaves. And I do eat the basal leaves as well. They're really tender right now and really lush. But you can see that these are also starting to rise. See that little broccoli head down in there? Barbaria is one of the slower of the mustards to really start to rise, but it has started. And once these get like an inch high or two, then you can start snapping those. I usually only eat a lot of this plant when there's a ton of it, like in a big meadow or field area where that's just all over the place. Then you can go and just like pick a ton of those little broccoli heads and fill up a giant bag. I never eat this plant raw. It's very bitter in a way I don't like. So I always blanch it, like boil it for a few minutes in a little bit of water until it's tender, then toss the water. And then the vegetable is just really nice, and just drizzle olive oil and lemon juice on it. Oh my God. Really, really good. It's all about how you cook it. One of the best vegetables in the world. It used to be one of my favorite vegetables for a long time. Fabulous! Chickweed. Chickweed is always the lushest right against a dwelling or against a rock wall, against a house. It just loves it. So here it is against my tent. I mean, it's literally everything you see is chickweed. And it's like that the whole property. But you can see like right up against my tent. Oh my God. Like that's what you want to pick. Like, you don't bother with the little, it's hard to do one-handed. I don't want to pull it up. I just kind of want to break it. That's some nice big chickweed. That's what you go for. You just take handfuls of it that way. Okay, so like about that much. And use both hands and grab a bundle and break it so that I don't pull up from the roots. And then you just keep pruning it and pruning it and pruning it. You can see, I just, harvested a bushel the other day. You just go in here and take a bundle and pinch that off. There, I just broke off, just that section. Give it a haircut. Give it a little haircut. And do that, 20 more times. Shove that in a jar, pesto that up. Put a bunch of olive oil, wild garlic in there, and blend that baby up. Or just eat it raw. Just anything. One of the greens I eat the greatest volume of in the spring ever. Yeah, just go for it. Violets are blooming. Tee-hee. And stinging nettles are up. Goodness gracious, look at them. They're gorgeous. I just harvested heavily from this patch just a few days ago, and it's so thick. So nip off these nice little tips. Cook them, kind of steam them or stir fry them, or just blend them into pesto. Look at all the stinging nettle. What else do you need in life if you have stinging nettle? You don't need anything else. You don't need anybody. Yeah, you do need people. You need plant people. Look at that one. Wood nettle is not up yet. Wood nettle takes a little bit longer than stinging nettle to start coming up. It's a little bit later, but soon. Stinging nettle! And look, see, I wasn't lying. The pokeweed. The baby pokeweed shoots popping up. The pre-shoots.
Alright, that's it for now. There's tons of other shit. There's so much other shit. Look at the handout. Just look at the PDF handout for some of all the other shit. There's so much. It's ridiculous. Wild carrot roots you could be digging right now. You just, yeah, it's just daylily shoots are up right now. Go ahead and eat those. Yeah, I may or may not put this video up on YouTube as well. I'm not sure. If I do decide to, and you're watching this on YouTube, know that this is one of the seasonal videos from my Patreon this spring, where I'm kind of following the growth of the plants, particularly the food plants here in the mid-Atlantic zone specifically. So if you enjoyed this, there are more on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/stormsofdaylight, and if you become a patron at any level right now, you get access to all the videos. Pretty good. It's all because of COVID. And I win the composition award of the day for my snazzy setups here. Bye!